thank you for starting the recording. And thank you for starting my very short slide series to introduce you to Theatre Green Book operations. So today we've got with us Laura Tendall, Sustainability Advisor at the National Theatre, Chris Harris, Acting Lighting Resources Manager at the National Theatre. I think his colleague Matt might be on the call as well, but we've got Chris talking to us. And Nick Southwell, who's an account manager at Recora. And I've also put you on this slide because we really hope that there'll be questions and time for questions and answers at the end. So what are we talking about today? Theatre Green Book. For those who are new to it, or if you've just coming across it, sorry, I've lost my slides. Theatre Green Book exists because we believe the climate emergency is the most serious challenge humanity has faced, and that theatre has an essential part to play in its response. And the first thing we have to do is become environmentally sustainable ourselves. And operations is really at the heart of that. So Theatre Green Book provides a complete methodology for making your operations, your buildings and your productions environmentally sustainable. It offers guidance, it offers support, and it offers a measurement system to make progress. On this next slide, we've just highlighted who's behind it. There is a small team, myself and Laura, our producer, an awful lot of freelancers working through committees. And these are our co-founders, Renew Culture and Bureau Happold, the engineers, plus our steering committee organisations, that's SALT UK Theatre, the Association of British Theatre Technicians, the Theatres Trust, the National Theatre and the National Theatre of Scotland. And huge thanks to their support for enabling us to do what we do. Theatre Green Book has been around for about 5 years now, and it has been a huge success. It's safe to say that it has cut through in an extraordinary way. And the SALT UK Theatre's latest survey suggested that about 2/3 of theatres are using it in some way. This slide shows some of the covers for all our international translations. There are 14 translations now, the most recent ones in Spain, and we also have new license agreements in Singapore, Japan and Lithuania in the last few months. We know there are active networks using Theatre Green Book in over 30 countries. And we're bringing together all these international networks this November at the National Theatre, which I'm particularly excited about. So Theatre Green Book works in 3 areas across the performing arts ecosystem. So there's productions, operations and buildings. And it has standards taking you from preliminary when you get started, which is a framework for changing your organisation, from getting commitment from your leadership to setting up a green committee, agreeing on an action plan, a data plan, and a comms plan. And once you've got those 5 things in place, you can start to work towards basic. And our basic level has some key milestones for you to reach in each of these 3 areas. Then you move into intermediate and finally advanced. And from the self-certification process that we run via our website, where people upload their trackers and upload their progress, we can see that almost the vast majority of organisations are working towards basic across all these areas. But we do have some extraordinary frontier organisations who are already at intermediate. Next slide, please. Just very quickly on operations. On the next slide, you'll see we split it into 6 areas, and we've got 6 webinars focused on each area, plus one on organisational change that are running through to November. The key principles the key resources that we offer on the next slide, just a snapshot of the toolkits and the guidance that is written by people working in theatres for others working in theatres. It's written in your language to help you make progress and get started on these things. And in operations, our main tool is a tracker. And the next slide just shows a quick snapshot of what that looks like. It's a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet with a lot of coloured tabs that are pre-populated. And that offers you a set of questions to take you through the different areas of your operations and help you work out where you're at and decide what's the most important action you can take next to become more sustainable. It's completely adaptable. It's a really flexible framework, but it just gives you that overall framework for you to work out what's right for your organisation. There are two concepts at the heart of the operations approach, and in particular waste, that I just wanted to share before we move into the speakers. The first of them is the waste hierarchy. The waste hierarchy is something you'll hear lots of people talking about in the sustainability world. And I think the thing that I would just draw your attention to is that there are two key levels before we get to recycling: prevent and reuse. And when we're thinking about waste, it is all five of these are important, but I feel like people often forget the prevent and reuse before we get to recycling. And the second concept I just wanted to introduce very briefly is the idea of a circular economy, which is absolutely crucial to that waste hierarchy as well. So the idea that things can be reused and repurposed and recycled and brought back into play. So we're keeping the value of materials as high as possible for as long as possible within this economy and having as little waste as possible as a result. Right, thank you, Tim. I think that's it from me, a whistle-stop guide to how Theatre Green Book approaches operations. And I'm thrilled to introduce our first speaker, Laura from the National Theatre. Laura is the Sustainability Advisor at the National Theatre. She has a degree in global development and sustainability, and her current work looks at the theatre's sustainability strategy, its decarbonisation plan, guidance and policy, as well as climate and business risk. She also runs a change management project, collaborating with teams across the entire National, helping them to integrate sustainability considerations into their work. Laura, over to you.
Thanks, Lily. So hi, I'm Laura Tendall, and as Lily says, I work at the National Theatre in London. I'm a white woman with brown hair and glasses, and I'm currently the Sustainability Advisor here, and I also spent 2 years managing our waste contract prior to my current role. So I'm going to talk today about how we currently manage our waste and the steps we sort of took to get here and what we're going to be focusing on going forward. Next slide, please. So following the COVID pandemic, our recycling rate had dropped, so we decided to make it a real priority to increase it. We knew that to do this, we had to divert as much material as possible away from the general waste. And so to do this, we focused on, similar to what Lily was talking about, the waste hierarchy. So first we looked at ways to reduce. So we identified and rectified unnecessarily wasteful processes. Of course, this is an ongoing thing, but that was the first thing we started to look at. We then looked at reusing, so identifying any opportunities for reuse or redistributing items. So diverting materials into recycling streams and away from the general waste. So I'm going to talk mainly on recycling today, and you'll be hearing from Chris from our lighting team later, who might talk a bit more about reducing and reusing. I'm also going to mainly focus on waste from our operations and workshops, not the sets, props and costumes themselves, but we are currently trialling our new NT Green store to look at reusing the production materials. So in order to improve our recycling, we wanted to better understand what materials were going into our bins so we could see where our problems were. And we started by doing some waste walkarounds, so chatting with teams and literally looking inside their bins. And from this, we were able to pick out materials that were being put in the wrong bins, and in particular, what materials were going into the general waste that could have been recycled, and also whether then we might need additional waste streams for these. So we then shared these findings with our waste company, Recora, still on the same slide, who were able to provide us with new waste streams to ensure we were able to separate out and recycle a lot of these materials going forward. In cases where materials could not be easily or efficiently recycled, we just tried to avoid using them. So an example of this was polystyrene. We did try recycling this, but then we quickly learnt that the transport emissions outweighed the emissions of actually recycling it, because the distance from our site to the recycling facility was so far, and polystyrene is mostly air, so it actually wasn't worth it in the end. So yeah, instead we just really try not to use it. So once we'd done our first pass auditing our own waste and adding new waste streams, we then got our waste company Recora to do some waste composition audits of their own. So Nick from Recora will be explaining this in a bit in more detail. But essentially, it just involved us filling up some sample bins. Recora weighed the different material types in those bins and then provided us with a report. And that gave us really useful insights and helped us identify areas for improvement. And we now do these audits with Recora on a regular basis in different locations across our site, so we can sort of ensure we're catching any new materials we might have started using. Next slide, please. So as a result of the walkarounds and the audits, we were able to identify many materials to have their own specialised waste stream. We now recycle over 20 waste streams. For example, textiles, so mainly from our costume and props departments, soft plastics. This can be sort of the shrink wrap that comes in our pallet deliveries, or sort of the plastic bags that every other delivery comes in. We now actually recycle almost 1.5 tonnes of soft plastic every year. We put cork recycling in our bars, coffee cups and glass in our foyers to match the new catering offer. We also added vapes to our existing battery recycling stream. And we also added things like cosmetic container recycling in our wigs, hair and makeup department, and stationery recycling in our printing rooms, as well as other more niche things like hard hats and eyeglasses. When our lost property found they were getting loads of glasses unclaimed, we looked to find solutions. So that's been really great. Next slide, please. So as well as allowing us to identify and introduce new waste streams, we also were able to figure out where we needed to focus our communication and engagement, particularly with our staff. So we introduced and implemented a range of staff engagement comms and activities. And I'm going to talk through these in a little bit more detail now. Next slide, please. So we updated and improved our bin signage. Our bin areas, as you can see, used to be quite confusing and cluttered. The signage was outdated and overly complicated, and they had tiny headings that just took way too long to read. So we made the bins themselves more consistent and easily identifiable. We made the signage much clearer. In some areas, we tailored the information on the signage to raise awareness of the most misunderstood and problematic materials that we'd found during our audits and walkarounds. For example, we had found a lot of tissues in our mixed recycling bins, but we learnt from our audits that they can't go in the mixed recycling bins because the fibres are too short, they create problems in the recycling process. So we've sort of pointed out on our signage that these have to go in the general waste. Next slide, please. We also got ourselves a presentation slot at one of our all-staff town halls. We'd noticed that there was some scepticism among staff that waste was actually being recycled, and wondering whether it was worth the extra effort, which I feel is a reasonable hesitation. I think there are obviously some issues in the UK's recycling processes, but we felt very confident in our waste company's transparency and what happened to our waste. So we put together some information for staff to explain exactly what happens to each of our waste streams, including where it's transported to, how it's broken down, what it's made into, basically trying to show that it is worth the effort. To help with this as well, we also did some staff visits to Recora's material recovery facility, which meant that staff could see for themselves where our recycling is taken to and what happens to it. Seeing the machines in action also helps to understand why certain things can't be recycled. So we could really clearly see bottle caps falling through the machinery because they were too small. So that's why you can't recycle bottle caps unless they're attached to the bottle. We also arranged a staff visit to Trade, which is Recora's textile reuse and recycling partner, which meant our costume and props teams could see exactly what happens to their unusable textiles. We delivered waste segregation training to our housekeeping team, and we also used these sessions to learn from the team themselves. They explained some of their challenges. Due to the size of our site, they sometimes had too many bin bags to carry at once, so we'd end up having to sort of mix multiple waste streams into the same bin bag for ease of transport. But this meant that by the time they got to the central waste area, because the bags had been mixed up, we all had to go in general waste, which is a problem. So to help this, we bought trolleys to help the team transport the bin bags much more easily across our large site. So they were still separated out when they got to the waste area. Really simple, but really helpful. Another thing we did with them was they mentioned that because they're often carrying lots of different bins at once, when they got to the central waste area to sort of offload the bags, it could be hard to know which bag had come from which waste stream. And while this waste segregation training tried to help with this, something else that made a big impact was using color-coded bin bags. So the team, when they got to the waste area, could really easily identify which bin the bag had come from, instead of having to look inside every single bag and sort of decide again for themselves. So we now have green bin bags for mixed recycling, clear for general waste, brown for food, blue for coffee cups and others. It makes it a lot easier for the team. Next slide, thank you. We also looked at new ways to increase our reuse before resorting to disposal. We do try to donate to local charities and redistribution organisations, but often due to sort of transport, it's not always feasible. So we try to address this on site. We do also have limited storage space on site. So even if something is technically reusable, we don't always have the space to store it for a long time. So to combat this, we started using a garage sale, which basically any random items that our teams accumulate across the building are sort of collated into an online staff intranet garage sale post. So everything's up for grabs for free to staff. Usually, well, it could be weekly, could be monthly, depends how much stuff we have, but it's really popular and it saves on disposal costs as well. We also created a waste guidance document, which is a simple one-page document. It gives staff a snapshot of how our waste is managed, steps our waste management team have already taken to make this more sustainable. And then it lists some really simple but useful tips on how staff can contribute and make the day-to-day activities less wasteful. And the guidance now sits within a whole series of sustainability guidance documents, including on procurement and travel and all the Green Book areas, really. And our aim is that these help to encourage other teams to consider their role in greening their own departmental processes. So this is my last slide, just about some challenges. So the first one being that waste disposal does obviously come at a cost, and adding waste streams can be the more expensive route for increasing recycling rates. While it is generally cheaper to dispose of mixed recycling than it is to dispose of general waste, disposal costs for some of the more specialised waste recycling streams can be more costly. But instead of seeing this as a barrier, we've really focused on looking ways to maximise the efficiency of our collections to bring this cost down again. So it just takes a bit of extra thought. But for example, our soft plastic used to be collected in bin bags and we paid per bin bag. But instead, we now bale up the soft plastics on site, which requires less space in the collection van. And it also means the emissions associated with the transportation are reduced, which brings down the cost to us. Another thing to consider is business growth. Currently, reducing our waste kind of contradicts with business growth. When we grow our business, it's likely our waste output will also grow as we're putting on more shows and opening new food and drink outlets. So it's something we really need to consider when expanding our operations. I think we should aim for any additions to operate as efficiently as possible and with a circular approach as much as possible. It's something we're still working on. We're continually trying to address it. Our food and drink team have recently made some really good changes. They now get their spirits delivered in large 10-litre containers, which saves 14 bottles every time they restock. And they now get their mixers in cans instead of glass, which requires 90% less energy to recycle. And of course, cups. We've explored reusable cups, glass cups, all kinds of cups. So we're just constantly trying to figure out ways to create less waste. But it is a challenge. And then the last thing I just wanted to note was the public realm waste. Despite our efforts to improve signage and bin locations and availability of streams, front of house, it can be a problem. The public is still often confused about what can be recycled. Often people are coming from all different areas. Recycling is done slightly differently, and it's just a bit too much. So we haven't figured out the silver bullet solution. Back of house, it can be easier. For example, we're currently trialing an I don't know bin in our workshops. So staff can use these to dispose of items they're unsure of, and then we can sort of step in and help to identify an appropriate waste stream. Obviously, this kind of thing isn't so feasible front of house, particularly at a venue with such a high footfall. Yeah, those are the things I wanted to note, and that is all from me.
Laura, thank you so very much. That was absolutely brilliant and so interesting to note the really small changes that have made a difference. Colour coding, getting trolleys so it's not as heavy. I love the garage sale for staff. I really hope that's on your job benefits list for HR, because I would definitely love to work somewhere that had a circular economy garage sale. So yeah, some brilliant ideas in there. Thank you so much. I'm going to move us on to our next speaker, Chris Harris, also from the National Theatre in their lighting team. Chris, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing since 2018 on reducing waste in the lighting department?
Of course. Hi, I'm Chris Harris. I'm Acting Lighting Resources Manager here at the National Theatre. I'm 45, male, not as blonde hair as I used to have. So obviously a lot of what we do is Theatre Greenberg is to do with productions, but there is also an operational side to what we do as well. So these are a few things that we've been doing over the years. So the first one was I realised just how much out of all of our equipment needs maintenance and cleaning, of which we're responsible for. So we were using, probably out of habit, those boxes of wipes. They're convenient, they're strong, they take the foam cleaner that we use properly, but they are not recyclable, and we get through a lot. We have an awful lot of equipment that needs cleaning in this building. And then we discovered these vacuum packed recycled clothing rags. Essentially, we have enough washing machines on site to be able to clean them when they need cleaning and washing once they're soiled. So that was a simple, cost effective. They get used over and over again until they really, really aren't usable, and at which point they go into the waste stream. Anyone who hasn't used these, I would warn you that as 1 kilo bag of vac packed rags gets opened, it gets quite exciting for a few moments. So the next one was our cable recycling. So we're currently going through a huge rewire project, building wide, but also in production lighting. And we have a lot of cable to power the lights as well and other equipment. And when that gets to end of life, it's either damaged through heavy use. We have to recycle it. And I totted it up for this since 2017, which was when I started. We've recycled 30 tons of copper, which astonished me when I added it all up. We store it all on site as it comes up. Once we've got a skip's worth, we call our recycling company, and it's a weight and load, and off it goes, and we get the reports of that. So that's that. The next biggest thing, it was not long after I started. Once I'd realised just how many cables we had across the lighting department, and none of them, every time they were used and then finished on a show, they would get coiled up and taped together with PVC tape. And we were getting through a ridiculous amount of rolls of PVC tape that obviously then get ripped off in order to use the cable, go in the bin and not be recycled. So one of the first things we did as we ran through all the maintenance periods in the theatres in that first year was across the 5,500 cables in the department. Every single one has a Velcro cable tie on it now. We use the bungees on trusses and lighting bars and booms rather than tape, if we can. So that's gone from a almost monthly restock of PVC tape down to twice a year. And it paid for itself. Obviously there is an outlay in buying Velcro ties. The more you buy it once, the better the price point you get. But nevertheless, it's a lot more expensive than PVC tape, unless you suddenly realise and do the maths and go, that paid for itself in less than 9 months. And all of those are still on those cables being used. I think there was historically they'll get covered in dirt and they won't be as effective at that. That just wasn't true. So that was a good win. Next, as part of our capital projects, we've had to replace a lot of our aging moving lights. In 2019 and 2020, the rubber SIP was introduced to protect the moving lights themselves in transport, and that replaced them all coming in polystyrene. There was a huge amount of polystyrene waste from all of this equipment. But because most of our moving lights are in the theatres, we have what we call a basic rig. We didn't need the SIPs once they were in use. They're very useful for going into flight cases because you only have to buy an empty trunk that you then put the SIPs into. But we didn't need those because we're not having flight cases for our lights because they're always in use in the theatres fundamentally. So we needed to work out a way of how to get a shot of these. I sort of spoke to Laura at the time and trying to work out a way of recycling them, and we both failed really to find a way for the theatre. So we spoke with Martin, the professional who supplied the lights, and we had many conversations over a really long time, over almost a year, and we luckily had space in one of our storage facilities to have all of these SIPs on the shelf while we desperately tried to, whenever we had free moments, try and move the conversation forward. And we eventually did, and we won. Yeah, it was a win. So Martin Professional agreed to organise taking them and hopefully reusing them. So it was difficult to get them back into the manufacturing process, i.e. going to a factory to have a new light put into, but there's also other ways. So two large well-known hire companies of us, they took a third each these 56 SIPs we had, because they were also able to buy the same lights, but in without SIPs, essentially. So they got the SIPs at a reduced cost for the lights, because they didn't need the SIPs. They had ours, which they then put into flight cases. One of the others, they had the way they run their business is a lot of their lights are get prepped in the warehouse and then tore on lighting trusses, so they didn't have flight cases. And then they've moved to the UK recently and are trying to expand, and that's sort of not how we tour productions in the UK. So they suddenly realized they had a lot of lights and no flight cases for their lights in the UK. So they bought empty flight cases and took a load of those SIPs. And the last third, they were Sound Technology, who are now Life Technology, who are Martin's distributor in the UK. They also work with Midwich as another partner organisation, and they had a means to recycle those SIPs. So that got moved within the organisation, and they were recycled into sustainable park benches, which was fun. So the next one was, again, with these discussions about SIP recycling and packaging in general, a few other manufacturers, as we purchase new lights, the conversations about packaging have been ongoing over the years. And Martin, for their smaller lights, Mac Auras and Mac Ones, they are now completely shipping in cardboard that is recycled cardboard and recyclable once it is used, as you can see from the packaging on the right. ETC have been doing that for quite a few years for their Source 4 LED series, which is the top left. Chauvet, we recently bought some of their new Pars, and those did unfortunately come in foam within cardboard, but they were happy to take the foam pack and recycle it properly via their waste streams, which they were able to do. So we palletized it and they came and collected it. And then all the other cardboard just goes via our usual Recora waste stream. And then finally, fixture donations. As part of, we've been in a lucky position to get capital money to replace our moving light rigs to go fully LED, which has reduced our power consumption massively, over 75%. But we have had 314 moving lights to dispose of. None of them were broken, but they were not reliable after, a lot.
Have we lost Chris, or is it just me?
We've lost him.
Chris? No. I think we might have lost him there. No, he's back.
I'm back.
You're back.
Hey.
Brilliant.
Which bit did you lose?
You were just talking about how the lights could be used in other places that just weren't reliable at the NT.
Yeah, great. So they were not reliable enough to keep being used after their 15 years here, 20 years in some cases. So, but not having to work as hard in smaller venues, they might still have a bit of life in them while you can still get parts and lamps. So that was the case. We worked with our drama schools and our partner venues like Lowry and Leicester Curve, Queenslip, Hornchurch. Those you can see back there. I think they were going to, I think that might have been Nottingham Playhouse, might have been Lowry, can't remember. So yeah, we started with venues around London in order to keep the transport costs down, but then moved out further afield and tried to help as much as we can. So a lot of those are still in use. Well, as far as I know, they're all still in use. We haven't scrapped or wasted a single unit, which is a really wonderful thing to do. We felt it was all, yeah.
It really is. On that note, Chris, thank you very, very much for sharing some of what you've been doing. And it is so behind the scenes, the amount of effort that's gone into literally caring enough about each fixture and each product. But I'm particularly impressed by the influence that I guess a building at scale of the national can have on suppliers and your manufacturers, and the kind of, you stayed with those conversations to get them to change and take back the SIPs, and then they've gone and found new partners. And, we see this motivating of each other and inspiring each other is such a big part of how we find new ways forward, big innovations and small wins are all part of that. So yeah, a really great insight into what you've been doing. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I'm going to move us on in the interest of time, and there's some great questions coming up in the chat as well. Panelists and everybody, if you've got some ideas on those, please do use the chat for that. I am pleased to announce, yes, very much announce, Nick Southwell, who's joining us from Recora. He's a sustainability consultant there and has been looking after the contract with the National for the last 2 years. And Recora are a zero to landfill company with 38 different waste streams, focused on segregation and recycling as many materials as possible. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you for that, Lily. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Like I said, my name is Nick. Pronouns are he, him, blonde hair, blue eyes. And because we're doing this over Zoom, we'll say that I'm over 6 foot. Just getting my presentation up here. Exactly. So looking at tackling theatre contamination. If you can move over to the next slide, please, Tim. So I will be going through the importance of recycling and challenges to theatres, as well as the auditing process and the results. A lot of it was brilliantly covered by Laura, but I'm just looking to provide potentially a bit more context from the waste management side of things as well when it comes to our usage of it. And then the findings and solutions, which again were covered, but happy to repeat that here. Next slide, please. So just a brief overview of who we are. So we are Recora, founded in 1988. We consider ourselves disruptors and innovators within the waste management industry. And yes, we do have over 38 different waste streams, looking to accommodate as many waste materials as we can for each businesses out there, and been partnered with the National Theatre for a very long time now. I've actually been only a short period of time in the grand scheme of things, but around 10 years, and around 2 of that has been with myself. So just helping everyone provide some context and letting you walk away from here being able to answer the question of why do we recycle? And I've got 5 reasons for you here. The first 2 go hand in hand, of course, reducing waste and conserving resources. There are a finite amount of resources and materials on the planet, so reducing the amount that we dig into those and the waste that is then produced by that is very, very important to be able to have sustainability for the whole planet. Saves energy, and I feel like the best way to explain this is with an example, is that it takes the same amount of energy to make 1 can of Coca-Cola as it does to recycle 25. That is because you are removing all of the processes beforehand that go into having the equipment, digging the materials out of the earth, transporting them, refining them down. Once you've got the material, the end product of the can, and you put that straight into recycling, you are cutting out that whole process and therefore saving so much energy. The legal obligation, very recently, simple recycling came into effect on the 31st of March, which required businesses to have not just general waste, but mixed recycling and food waste as well, making sure they had those waste streams in place, as well as expanding on that later on with glass and potentially flexible plastics, which is a legal obligation for yourself, but also falls onto the waste management suppliers like us to be able to provide you those waste streams and the context of what you will need to do to accommodate that. And lastly, saves money. Again, drawing back to what Laura said about how general waste is the most expensive waste stream to dispose of in terms of your unit cost for yourself. Some of the more niche waste streams will come up potentially a higher price, but when we're boiling it down to the base waste streams of general waste, mixed recycling, food and glass, all three of those are cheaper than general waste, and that's industry standard designed to ultimately have a monetary incentive for businesses to try and recycle as much as possible. Next slide, please, Tim. Thank you. I thought we'll also just tack on some facts for you as well, give you the context on what's happening with some of these key materials that we see floating about out there. So glass. Glass is indefinitely recyclable. It can constantly be used, placed back into its glass waste stream, gone to a facility for recycling, and then turned back into another bottle there. It doesn't basically lose any of its quality or purity. What we would be looking to do with glass is remove any impure piece of glass, so that's often kitchenware or Pyrex or anything that is contaminated as well, leading to a decrease in the quality that is produced. Plastic bottles take 500 years to decompose, so making sure that once these are used, they are then put back into the recycling waste stream so that they can then be turned back into plastic bottles as opposed to landfill or just being left out there to then slowly decompose. That's something that you would like to capture. The production of paper is very intensive on the resources needed to make it. And you can see here by the examples of 1 ton of paper saves 17 trees, 7,000 gallons of water, and enough energy to power an average home for 6 months. And the aluminium and the recycling of this material sort of draws back to what I said earlier about the energy saving methods that are then put into place once then it is then recycled. Thank you, Tim. So from our perspective, and I imagine it will be the same for the theatres, what makes theatres quite unique is the fact that a lot of what you'll be providing to your customers potentially will be hard to recycle or contaminated waste that will then feed directly into general waste and might not be able to be recycled. The next two go together: a fast-paced environment with theatre audiences, the public realm. Recycling and best practice can certainly fall by the wayside when you do have these two factors. And the multi-purpose buildings, you aren't just the one office space that can just have a very concentrated focus on segregating the waste. You will have your public realm, office, production, potential kitchen and canteen areas as well. All of these potentially requiring bespoke solutions to how they will manage the waste that is produced there. Next slide, please, Tim. So next I will just sort of recover the auditing process. Like Laura mentioned, we provide you 2 containers, one for mixed recycling and one for general waste. Focusing on these are often the waste streams that could see the most amount of contamination placed into either of those, as the public and various people are just then throwing away their waste. So we provide these containers, train or at least pass on the information to the cleaning staff that when they are doing the rounds and collecting all of the sacks, they dispose of a random sack every time into these, keeping the sample incredibly varied. Once that has all been built up over the course of a couple of days, we will then bring that back to our facility in Purfleet. The bins, the total quantity within the bins are then weighed, so we have our total sample. And after that's been done, our recovery experts then go into each and every sack and place every item into a specific waste stream, ultimately building up the amount of waste that came from each of those sacks and weighing that again to get an overall data sheet of exactly what was found in each container for general waste and mixed recycling. We were then able to build a report and then in a follow-up meeting go over this with the clients, with what we found and then the recommendations that will be from that also. Next slide, please, Tim. So next, I just thought it'd be a great idea for you to visualize actual results from an audit that we carried out quite a while ago now, that then has fed into some of the things that Laura spoke about with trying to improve better signage and better practices, basically. So first of all, just looking at the mixed recycling audit. You can see at the top there, we've got cans and plastics, cardboard and paper, 3 materials that we do expect to see into the mixed recycling bin. So making up around 31% of the total waste that was captured within that, which is great. That's exactly the materials that we want to see in there. 38% of the waste that we found within the audit, though, was general waste. So again, going back to materials that cannot be recycled, or materials that are too contaminated to be considered recycling, so wouldn't be able to go into either the cardboard, paper, or plastics. So those are the main 2 that we tend to focus on when looking at this audit. The bit that provides you the extra detail that you can then try and action would be the other quarter of that. So first of all, looking at food and glass. These are items that really you would expect the public or certain members of staff to have a key focus on. And the fact that these are making their way into mixed recycling is quite alarming, because we should have these waste streams in place to be able to then segregate that and make sure that these aren't then contaminating the materials that we're getting. Once you contaminate the cardboard or the paper, you are breaking down its fibers and making it a lot more difficult to recycle and shortening its span. So those are key areas that you would look to highlight from this audit. And secondly, more niche materials that we are finding within this. So compostables, compostable packaging, coffee cups, and film and wrappers. Now, whenever I see this in a mixed recycling audit, what that tells me is, well, okay, that's great that someone has approached the bins and gone, I've got my coffee cup with me, I'm going to try and recycle this, I'm not just going to throw this into general waste. Same with the compostables, or the film and wrappers would probably say a crisp packet. The problem with that is those are not materials that can actually be recycled through mixed recycling. They need to go down their own niche waste stream in order to then be recycled and turned into another product. So that is something that Recora have then taken into account once we've carried out these audits and made sure that we have these waste streams in place. So if people are conscious that they produce a lot of compostables or a lot of coffee cups, that they then might have that in place. Ultimately, those 3, as an example, would want to go into general waste if you didn't have the waste stream set up to segregate those. But we like to highlight those in this audit to tell you that this is exactly what you're finding in your mixed recycling. Please go on to the next one, Tim. And next, just onto the general waste, where again, hopefully you're seeing the perspective here of the breakdown of what we find in this. Funnily enough, an even smaller percentage of general waste actually within the general waste bin as compared to the mixed recycling, with, I believe, a large percentage of this now being glass that is being placed into there, and the film wrappers as well. Again, glass, one that almost definitely would want to make its way into its own separate waste stream. Film wrappers, that is being placed into the correct waste stream, considering that we don't have a very niche bin to collect all of those, but still something that we want to highlight for you here. And food as well. Less of a contamination factor with food when going into the general waste, but what this is doing is this is like deducting from the total amount of food waste that we could be factoring into the recycling report. Taking the food out of the mixed recycling general waste, getting it into its own waste stream means that is going to anaerobic digestion and therefore being used to produce either biogas or biofertilizer. So it's ultimately just a waste of the raw material there going into the general waste bin. Next slide, please, Tim. Thank you. And the findings and solutions, again, these were covered really well by Laura in the previous bit of the presentation. I think a focus from this did come glass and coffee cups. Around over 25% of the overall audit showed that glass and coffee cups were being placed into general waste and mixed recycling. So from the back of that, we introduced the glass waste stream into the public facing areas, as well as various coffee cup bins to be able to then collect these and make sure they aren't going into the mixed recycling stream either. Not only providing these waste streams, but also making sure that these are color coded to, again, assist with the understanding of exactly where these sacks are then looking to go, providing context to the cleaning team and potentially to the public as well. We use WRAP color coding, which is the government guidelines, and the bin infrastructure that we have there as well, making sure it's nice and clear, nice and concise, making sure that it's easy as possible for when people are looking to recycle these materials. I believe that is it all from me then.
Thank you so much, Nick, for that absolute deep dive into just how important it is to separate things into different waste streams. And I feel like there's such a big public education element there that, people just don't understand. So I know one of the questions that came in was, is it true that most things don't get recycled? And I think that myth that, well, they don't if they're contaminated, we can only do it when it's really separated. So I just wanted to ask, you work with loads of different organisations, not just theatres. What's a good recycling rate? What should we think of when we're thinking like, what's a good recycling rate?
Sure, no, that's a great question. I feel like it ultimately comes down to partly maybe your expectations and what you think you should be able to achieve. A good recycling rate would be around 70%, 70 to 75%. You want to aim as high as possible. At Recora, there's a wide-ranging result of recycling rates for a lot of the businesses that we provide waste management services for. Some of them in their 80 to 90%. This is often seen in the offices where they've got where companies put a lot of investment and strong control into the waste streams that they provide for the employees within their offices, making sure there are centralized T points, very clear signage, and plenty of options for not just making sure they put everything into the general waste bins, that they then use the mixed recycling, food and glass, as well as potentially coffee cups and flexible plastics. Keeping all of these different materials out of general waste will be one of the biggest impacts you can have on the recycling rate there. But I mean, I'm conscious of then giving that figure and someone being like, oh no, if I get my waste management provider to tell me what we're at and we're only at 50, that's rubbish. Ultimately, when no, it's not rubbish.
None of it's rubbish.
None of it's rubbish, no. Ultimately, theatres have that challenge, like we mentioned earlier, of operating in the public realm, and the public are notoriously really bad at recycling. So trying to put in as many, first of all, managing what you can manage, your office spaces, and then your production areas as well, where you do have your own employees on site, making sure everyone is as trained as possible for what they're looking to do there. And then with the public spaces, just making sure that they have as many options as possible and everything is as clear as it can be, would be one of the best things that you can do for that.
Thank you, Nick. And yes, Theatre Green Book very much operates from a principle of start with where you're at, start with what you can control, make it easy for yourself, find your first steps. I'm also going to take away binfrastructure. What a great port.
That slipped out, and then I realised I put in bin infrastructure. But yeah, please use that from now on. It is binfrastructure. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat, which is, I think, a good one for you, Nick. Maybe you can answer it in the chat about bin bags. Are bin bags bad?
Yeah. Ultimately, no. I don't think that bin bags are bad. The premise of the bin bag is about making sure that the waste is contained in a single area. It's more from a hygiene perspective, I would say, as opposed to just having one great big metal bin that's got loads of loose material in there. Your cleaning team aren't going to be able to operate with that. So you need to have a bin bag society, unfortunately, where that is then collected and then taken over to our containers. When it is then brought over to ourselves and our facility, it is then, mainly just managed, ripped apart. The content within the bags is then segregated as necessary. But no, bin bags aren't going to be a bad thing. I know some people try to go out of their way to purchase compostable bin bags as a alternative as well. That can be quite useful for you. So whether some people get that just for food, but yeah, bin bags definitely aren't a bad thing. It is something that you're going to require. Especially final thing as well with that color coding as well. If they are color coded bin bags, that helps the cleaning team. It helps the people disposing as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm very conscious that we are about to hit 1 o'clock, and I haven't even had time for my closing slides. So we've got some learning around timekeeping to do, but I just want to thank everyone so much for turning up today. Please send your questions on to us if you'd like, and we'll do our best to answer them. Clearly, it's not just about waste, it's about organisational change and mindset. it's about having a different, changing our attitude to what waste is, and making it an asset rather than just rubbish. But yeah, lots and lots of really great ideas in there today. I hope you'll take some away and come back for more of these webinars through the autumn. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.